Now that we're in the thick of the global COVID pandemic, with hundreds of millions of people abruptly forced to work from home, we are all struggling to make our home environments work as offices. Many of us are finding us hunched over laptops on sofas or beds, perched on hard dining room chairs, or subjecting our arms and wrists to ill-placed keyboards. For most of us, gone are the days when well-designed offices took care of these problems for us. While many of us have had the opportunity to work from home in the past, this has posed a great challenge as no one really had time to prepare. It is important to keep ergonomics in mind as you adjust to the new normal and work from your home environment. Ergonomics is about how your work environment, including your equipment, is set up to maximise function and capabilities, prevent work-related injuries, and promote health and safety. So as we take precautions and stay isolated to contain the spread of coronavirus, how can we make sure that we're not subjecting our bodies to different hazards caused by poor work from home setup? At Cigna, we care about your health and well-being while you work away from your usual office environment. We are committed to ensuring that you are equipped and prepared to work from home, both physically and mentally. Today's session is entitled Ergonomics at Home and Work, where we delve deep into key ergonomic concepts, principles, and adjustment guidelines. We will discuss tips to turn your home workspace into an environment that works for your health. without further delay, I'd like to introduce Adrian, who has an MBA geared towards technology management and extensive experience in ergonomic design. Having worked on projects in critical national infrastructure, Adrian is specialised in designing environments that focus on well-being of employees. I'd like to remind you that throughout the session, you can ask questions on the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Thank you, and over to Adrian.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for the introduction, Alison. As Alison was saying, the presentation today is really looking at ergonomics and what is ergonomics and how can we start to incorporate ergonomics into our environments, wherever they may be. Some of us are in the office, some of us are locked down. Where I am, we're starting to go back into lockdown. So this is really, really important to start thinking about ergonomics and looking after ourselves in the environment that we find ourselves in. So let's take some notes today, and hopefully you can adjust your environment and you can benefit from some of this information. So today, what we're really going to focus on, some of the learning objectives, is how do we configure that working from home or indeed any environment for optimal health, comfort and performance. So we really want to get the most out of ourselves, but also to protect ourselves and stay healthy and look after our well-being. We do this today by sort of elevating some of your awareness of key concepts. How do we make minor adjustments? A lot of minor adjustments can add up to a big increase in well-being. We're going to give you a few insights into what we call neutral postures. You'll hear me refer to that a couple of times in the presentation. We really want to try and achieve what we call a neutral posture, which I'll get into in a second. And depending on where you get your information from, what we really want to do is dispel some misconceptions. So depending upon what people are trying to sell you via social media, via Facebook, via many internet sites, they have different pieces of advice. Some of it is good and some of it's not so good. So we just want to make sure that we sort of take that into account, and we try to offer you good advice to cut through some of that. So first, before we get into that information, let's just focus on what is ergonomics. So ergonomics is the science of fitting the task to the worker. So that's the first thing. If you imagine that your task is to input information into a laptop, we want to make sure that we fit that laptop to you as a person, as an individual. What we find ourselves doing a lot of the time is fitting ourselves to the laptop. So we lean in, it draws us in a bit like a tractor beam for anybody who's a sci-fi fan. It really drags us in because the keyboard and mouse are typically part of the device that is the screen as well. So we find ourselves leaning in. As the work becomes more intense, we really start to get in, and it draws us in, and that has an effect on your eyes, it has an effect on your posture. And why do we do this? So we do this to maximize productivity, reduce discomfort, fatigue and injury. So it's ergonomics is all about your best interest. It's all about making sure that you're comfortable. It's about making sure that everything we try and do with our equipment, with our environment, is for your best interest. So we really want to make sure that we try to do that. Some of you will have noticed that you're starting to get a bit more niggly pains. We're starting to get to the point now where we've been working from home for a long period. So we need to try and make sure we address this and we get into that detail as much as we can. So home office setups, there's a lot of different setups out there. We've got an example of one here, just a picture that we've kind of got a stock image of. Now, whilst this may look good, it's very well designed, it looks appealing to the eye, there's a few issues, there's a few concerns. First of all, there's a fixed keyboard and monitor height. So we can't make any adjustments based upon our size. If I'm 7 foot tall, it's going to cause me real issues looking down towards that laptop. Equally, if I'm 5 foot, it's going to cause me issues because I may end up sort of leaning forward to have to look up at the laptop. We also have a chair there that looks really, really nice chair. It's designed really well based on some good sort of aesthetic principles, but it's very, very poor in terms of adjustability. So we've got fixed armrests. They look very, very hard. They're metal. We've got a fixed backrest, and we can't adjust the seat pan at all. So depending on our size, the chair doesn't really work with us. We've also got body alignment issues. So as you can see, the chair is tilted to one side, the laptop's tilted to one side, and that's predominantly because we have quite a small work surface there. So if there's any documents, if there's anything that we're working with outside the laptop, there's going to be limited space. You're going to start getting on top of yourself. It's going to be quite hard to actually work in that environment after too long a period of time. This slide's just about really sort of demonstrating that there's many different work from home environments. We're finding ourselves working from what was our home is now our office. In many cases, it's now our workplace. We're starting to become strangers in our own environment because we're at the point where we've worked from home for extended periods. We are working from home continually for extended periods. This is the place where you go home to relax. You don't necessarily do a lot of work at home. Now it's a place where you do all of your work. And the variability between my home and your home is immense. And that's based on taste. That's based on culture. That's based upon environment. So you might sit somewhere because it's got a good Wi-Fi signal. You might sit somewhere in your house because it's away from the family and kids who are getting ready for school, as the case in my house right now. So depending on your environment really changes upon where you sit. We have Zoom calls, we have Teams calls. We're obviously doing a webinar right now, and you choose your location based upon the background. So there's a lot going on in our environments that we really wouldn't have had to consider in an office environment. So we just need to make sure that when we do come into this type of environment, we look after ourselves, and it just makes good sense to make some adjustments. So we're gonna look at that now. As I said, we really want to minimize what we call awkward postures. So we've got a guy sat here. He's sat on the couch, which we really wouldn't recommend for anything more than sort of 5 minutes. He's experiencing what we call awkward posture. So he's having to engage his muscles to maintain the posture, to maintain the position. So first thing he's experiencing is trunk flexion. So he's leaning forward. He's got neck flexion, so he's extending his neck there to actually sort of look down. He's got contact stress behind the knee, and his feet are not supported. So that's a really poor posture, and we really want to try and get away from that kind of posture. And these tend to exist in home environments if we don't start to think about how we set ourselves up. So it's really important that we really try to get away from this. What we want to aim for, as I mentioned before, is neutral postures. So a neutral posture can be defined as a posture that requires minimal muscle involvement to maintain the posture. So we've got an example here of somebody who's using a laptop, and they've made a couple of adjustments. So they've raised the chair, they've got the correct seat pan depth. So as you can see, there's a slight gap between behind the back of the knee. The keyboard height's correct. They've got the keyboard a lot closer to their body. We're going to go into this, so don't worry too much about this. The arms are supported at the palm, so really important that we support our arms via the palm, the fleshy bit of the hand. We've got a good monitor height and depth, so we've used some books there to raise the monitor height. We'll get into that, and we've got the feet supported. So we really want to make sure we try and aim for that kind of posture, and that neutral posture is really good. One of the key things, so there'll be a couple of key things. One of the key things here is it's the same as anything we do in life, whether it's a diet, whether it's aiming for a particular target at work. I could drop the best ergonomic equipment to your location. We could set it up, but if you stick with your old habits and you stick with your old ways of working, it doesn't matter what we give you. Behavioral change is often the last sort of 5-10%. So we really need to make sure that we commit to making changes. If we're going to alter our setup, then we need to make sure that we do that in a way that's going to be beneficial. So we've got an example here. This person's got a really good task chair. They're actually, they've got the keyboard set up correctly. They've got a monitor arm. They've got a lot of good things in that environment, but he's leaning forward, his feet aren't supported correctly, his legs aren't supported correctly. So it's really key that we make sure that we break those old habits, and we aim for what we need. So let's just have a quick look at optimizing our home work environment. How can we do that? So we've got a number of different sections in this part of the presentation. The first is we're going to look at how we can optimize your seated posture. So it's really, really important that we can't really get into this without talking about chairs. So I completely appreciate that not everybody has a fully adjustable task chair. So this is kind of a scale. On the far left-hand side, that is the ideal scenario. On the far right-hand side, that is what we really don't want you to be aiming for. Lounge seating, bean bags. We really don't want to have a chair without a backrest. And I'll get onto that in a second. So it's really, really important that we try to at least aim for the middle, so non-adjustable, the backrest, and if possible, let's try and get some adjustment into the chair. Appreciate not everyone has task chairs at home. Obviously I work for Human Scale, so I do have a larger range of ergonomic equipment, but typically we find people, if they haven't been provided a task chair, they're in that middle column in terms of a non-adjustable chair with a backrest. So how do we get that environment adjusted? How do we try and get you comfortable in that environment? We're just going to cover a couple of those different pieces now, just so that you can sort of make some adjustments. So let's look at a task chair first of all. So and really any chair, if you have some adjustments, these are the adjustments we want you to aim for. So first of all, seat height. So we want to sit so that our feet are planted firmly on the ground. Or on a foot support, depending upon your height, and your thighs are parallel to the ground. So that's really, really important. That's keeping our legs nice and level and making sure our feet are supported. In terms of seat depth, we want to maintain a 2-inch gap behind the back of the knee. So just where that front seat edge comes down, we want to aim for sort of 3 fingers behind, and that will give us clearance to allow blood flow and allow our nerve sort of flow to continue, not to restrict our flow at all. Backrest and lumbar support. So let's position the lumbar in the small of the back. So let's give the small of our back some real good support there, and let's make sure that we actually engage our back with the backrest. That's really, really important. If you find yourself leaning forward, there's going to be some issues there, and I'll come on to those in a second. Armrest height. So the most relaxed we can have our arms is if we actually put our hands together like this, and we not touching the armrest, but we actually put our arms in our lap. That will feel really relaxed. It might feel slightly unnatural if you've been used to sort of supporting your weight on your armrests. Really, we don't want to get into that, and there's specific reasons why, but let's try and use the armrest so there's minimal touch with our hands. And backrest tension. So what's really, really important is that we release the backrest tension. That is paramount. So I said this is the second part of what's really important in today's presentation. If I could just recommend one thing, it's to make sure you don't have your chair locked. As soon as you lock your chair in any position, you don't have movement. You don't have spontaneous movement. You can't adjust your posture at will. So we need to make sure we try and get away from that if we can. The reasons for that are very, very clear in the evidence. So we're always taught when we're growing up, sit at 90 degrees, sit up straight, sit up straight at school. What's massively important is that we actually recline slightly. So when we do that, we lessen the amount of pressure on our spinal discs. We're actually offloading the majority of our body weight, which is our torso and our head, onto the backrest. So by doing that, we really reduce the amount of weight that's going directly through our spine. So this is going back to what I said, some of the social media, some of the internet things that you see people in these postures and they're sat at 90 degrees. This is great, sit like this and you'll be fine. It's really, really hard to maintain that posture without any sort of degradation, any sort of pain after a very short period of time. I always think to myself, when I go home and I relax and I'm maybe watching a football or watching some rugby on TV, whatever it may be, I do not sit at 90 degrees. So I sit so I'm comfortable. So if you just compare the 90-degree posture with the reclined posture on this chart, 90 degrees is almost the same as holding a 22-pound weight out in front of you. So you can imagine the pressure that puts on your spine. So bear that one in mind. That's a really, really good tip. The more reclined you can be, the better you're going to feel. It's going to reduce that pressure on your lower back. we want to try and do that as much as possible. So I mentioned, some of us will be on non-adjustable chairs. One of the key things for non-adjustable chairs is how do we make slight adjustments so that we kind of, hack that particular situation. So if you need to raise your seat height, let's use a cushion. So we'll come on to monitors in a second, but it's really important if you need to raise yourself up slightly to get the right height for your monitors, let's use a cushion. You might have a cushion to hand the pillow. If your chair's too high, let's support the feet. So if you raise the seat, normally you raise the feet. We want to, again, maintain that nice parallel position of the thigh. If your seat pan's too deep, so you can't get that 3-finger gap between the back of your legs at the front of the seat, let's, maybe it's too far back. Let's use a cushion, and maybe you do have a back support that can push you slightly forward out of the seat, attach that to the backrest. And if you don't have lumbar support, then roll up a towel. So maybe get a towel, get some elastic bands, make that into a nice sausage, and put that in your lower back to support your lumbar region. Maybe you have something that you've brought back from the office that could meet that purpose as well. But let's try and put some of these in place so that we can actually experience a good non-adjustable chair. Excuse me. So what we've got before and after here. So good versus bad, left versus right. What we're experiencing on the left-hand side before we make any adjustments is we have neck flexion. So this person's sort of leaning down, reading a laptop. You see that a lot. Trunk flexion. So there is no contact between her back and the back of the chair. And we have contact stress. So contact stress is where we lean on hard surfaces and we have that contact for extended periods. As I mentioned, that can reduce blood flow to your hands, can reduce blood flow to your legs if you have that contact stress. So let's come off those hard surfaces if we can. Let's roll up a towel. So the after shot is we've got some lumbar support there. We've got a cushion to raise ourselves up. As you can see, the back is now fully in contact with the backrest, and we've got a box to support the feet. So we're keeping that nice parallel thigh. If the box wasn't there, her feet would be dangling, which is really what we want to try and get away from. But just looking at left versus right, the right looks far more comfortable than the left, and that's using things that we have in our house. It's not providing new equipment. So this is a really easy way to get some more comfort if you've been doing this for a long time. When we look at the seat pan depth, what we want to try and do is ensure that when we're looking at the work surface, one point just to mention here is, as I mentioned right at the top, what we really want to try and get towards is thinking about ourselves and thinking about how we fit and how our environment works for us. So most work surfaces standard are about 29.5, 30 inches. That is a standard work surface for the 98th percentile male. So somebody who's 6'4". If you're not 6'4", then you need to adjust your work surface. There's a difference between the 5th percentile female at 5 foot and the 98th female at 6'4" of 7.5 inches. So there's a big differential there between somebody just based on their size. So the point we're trying to make here is think about your environment, think about how it works for you, and don't just accept what you've been given as your kitchen table is that height, therefore that's the height you need to work at. That will cause you problems if you're having to reach up, if you're having to lean forward, or if the work surface is too low. We've got to make sure that we sort of design for that scenario. Keyboard placement is really important. So as I said when we were talking about the environment, what we really want to try and do is bring our tools to us as much as possible. If we don't do that, then what we get is, typically our keyboards are too far away. So we lean for those tools. We get trunk flexion, as is sort of mentioned here. Contact stress is, as I said, when we're leaning on hard surfaces. So let's try and, but when lockdown first happened, I didn't have a palm support. So we want to try and, hack something in there. I use a tea towel, piece of material rolled up to support my palms and to really support on this fleshy bit of the palm rather than leaning on the wrist. You really don't want to cut off blood supply on your wrist or on your, on anything beyond the palm. So let's bear that in mind. And if your work surface is too high, you experience what's called shoulder shrugging. So you're constantly leaning up to type. We really don't want that, because that's going to lead to fatigue. You're going to really feel that towards the end of your week. Keyboard's really interesting. So if you have an external keyboard, you might have these little tabs that sort of fold out to raise the angle. That actually doesn't help us at all. So by doing that, what we're actually experiencing is wrist extension. So we're lifting our wrists up to type. That's really bad for us, because to do that, I'm engaging my muscles. To do that, I'm engaging my muscles. If I just have a nice flat palm, it's a lot easier. And you can demonstrate yourself by sort of wiggling your fingers to imitate typing, or wiggling your fingers to imitate typing. Level, it's much easier to do that. So let's get rid of those tabs, flatten the keyboard as much as possible. Obviously in the lower picture here, we've got a nice straight wrist. We want to make sure that we use that as much as we can, and let's not have that wrist anchoring. So let's try and support our palm with some sort of material or palm support if we can. Reposition your keyboard. So really key. Let's think about this. If your keyboard's too far away, as I mentioned, we're going to lean in. The first thing we can see in that first picture is there's no contact with the backrest. So it goes against what I said before, which is you're going to start getting lower back pain if you set yourself up in this scenario. Let's use our backrest as much as possible. In order to do that, we need to bring our tools towards us. So a really quick fix I always recommend is external keyboard and mouse. If you haven't done that, let's get a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. That's really good way of bringing that towards you as close as possible. Ideally, if you had a keyboard tray, I appreciate that not everybody has a keyboard tray at home, but that's something you can put in your lap and put your tools on that. And it allows for proper use of the backrest, but it's also a far more comfortable scenario when we're typing and when we're using the mouse. So let's just look at monitor and documents. Let's just so monitors are really key. So if you're using a laptop, if you're using a desktop, it's the same thing. What we really want to do is adjust our monitors so that we have a nice, our eye level is level with the top line of text on the screen. So we really want to aim for that. So most of the screen is below our eye level. The reason for this is most people have a natural 15-degree decline on the actual view. The reason, nobody looks directly at the horizon when we're walking around. Everybody looks slightly down. So we want most of the screen visible in that natural 15 degrees. When it comes to the distance, I always say like an arm's distance away. That's the ideal distance to be. 20 to 40 inches is kind of a measurement. But one of the key things, if you actually wear glasses, then you need to adjust so that you can read the screen. One thing I always look for is when people open a document, they lean in to read it, or do they kind of go like this to read it? If they have glasses on, that could be one or the other. So we need to make sure that we set our monitors up so that we take account of both of those things. Alignment's really important. So what we don't want is hunting and pecking, as they call it, to go everywhere, especially if you're not a touch typist. We really want to make sure that our documents are aligned with the monitor in a straight through fashion. So the letter B or the middle of the space bar should be aligned with your belly button or the center line of your body. That will give you a really nice work through. What we don't want is your documents over here, you're constantly looking, you're looking back, you're typing. That's going to be repetitive. That's going to cause injury. That's going to cause, repetitive strain over a period of time. It's just going to make you really uncomfortable. So let's try and look at that. So if you're using a laptop, there's a few little things that we can look at in terms of setup. Again, good versus bad, before versus after. So classic laptop scenario. So the monitor height's too low. We put it on the work surface. We lean forward. We look down. Keyboard's too far away. We're shoulder shrugging to get to the keyboard, and we have a hard surface. So, our legs and our backsides are not going to thank us if we sit on a hard seat for prolonged periods of time. That's not going to be any fun at all. The after scenario. So what we've done is we've got those external input devices. We are using a palm support. As you can see, it's the grey piece underneath her hands. And we've brought those tools right to the edge. So we're resting our body weight, our arm weight on our palms on this palm support. We've raised the monitor up. So we've got some books there. It's a really, really good way of doing that. We've added a cushion and we've got a box in there. So we're sort of hacking that environment a little bit to give us what we need. When we look at the desktop, very, very similar, sort of before versus after. So if you're using a desktop rather than a laptop, then again, we need to adjust this. So, you know, the monitor's too far away. This hasn't been adjusted properly. We have a hard seating. We've got the, again, lack of palm support means we're anchoring. We're actually leaning on our elbows slightly on that desk, unsupported feet. When it comes to the after scenario, what we really want to do is look at, you know, get that monitor up so it can be adjusted. One of the key things is to know your equipment. Make sure you know how it adjusts. Make sure you've read the instructions if you want to get the optimal position for yourself. So in this scenario, they just hadn't adjusted that on the actual stand. We've got a palm support again. We're using a cushion. We're using a box. So again, before versus after. In the after scenario, she looks more comfortable. And she's made some very, very simple changes. We just need to make sure we engage with our environment and we know what those changes are when we come to executing those. What we want to aim for, this picture, and I really do appreciate this lady has everything that we provide as a business. It's unlikely you're going to have that scenario at home, more likely in an office, but this is what we're aiming towards. So how can we get towards this scenario? The same principles apply. She's got back contact on the chair. Her feet are supported. She has a nice level thigh. Again, her monitors are raised such that she can use them. So let's try and replicate this environment as much as possible. This is what we're aiming towards. If we can do this with some things that we have at home, then great. And let's just make sure we try and take a lot of these things into account. So sit stand. So really, really important. I did mention that there's a lot of information out there in terms of social media. What do we know about sit stand? So first of all, sitting is really, really bad for us for prolonged periods. It's not great at all to be sat down and work. What does it do? It elevates the spinal disc pressure. It actually reduces an enzyme called LPL after about an hour. And this is the enzyme responsible for burning fat. So you don't have to be a genius to work out the longer you sit down, the less fat you're going to burn, the fatter you're going to become. So we really want to try and, for health reasons, for posture reasons, try and get away from this. It also reduces the demands on our circulatory system. So it's not as demanding for our bodies to actually sit down. It's pretty obvious. Now, if you look at social media posts, depending on what people are trying to sell you in adverts on the internet, the answer that a lot of people come up with is, well, standing is the solution, right? Prolonged standing also has negative impacts. So it's 20% more tiring, which, over a period of a day, if you were to stand all day, then that would be really, really bad for you. You'd be really, really worn out at the end of the day. It causes varicose veins, so pooling of blood. It causes pressure on your spine, on your hips, on your joints, on your knees. So we really want to try and avoid prolonged standing. When I used to go back in before we locked down, when we went into people's offices, you'd see people and they'd installed sit-stand desks and people were visibly leaning on the desks and they're working, they're typing and they're leaning on the desk and they're sort of bending their legs and they're stretching. Their bodies are telling them to sit down. So you really need to listen to your body. If your body's telling you it's tired, your activity and your posture is going to change. So you need to make sure that if you're not used to standing, then you don't try and stand up all day as the solution. That's just not going to work. We need to try and make sure we balance this up as much as we can. If we are going to stand, or maybe we have a sit-stand device, just a couple of tips. So we want the typing surface to be about 1 inch below your rested elbow height. Again, monitors are really important, so position them at or slightly below eye level at an arm's reach. Tilt them slightly away if we can, so it takes into account the angle that we have. Feet shoulder width apart, so a nice neutral standing position. And let's avoid leaning on that desk edge. That, as I say, once you become tired, you start to lean, which really isn't good for us. We need to make sure that we we adjust that, and we try to set ourselves up as much as possible. What we have seen, and again, I'll go back to what's on the internet. People say, "Wow, you know, when you're not sat down, you're not using your chair. So let's just throw that up on the table and let's create this sort of makeshift scenario." I would really recommend that you don't do this. First of all, what have we got here? So from everything that we've discussed so far, we've separated the keyboard and a mouse. So I'm typing up here and then I'm going down here to use the mouse. That's a really, really poor thing. You're going to have repetitive strain by going up and down. You know, you're varying your posture to try and use your tools. That's not right. The tools should fit in with you, as we know. There's a task light that's shining directly on the keyboard, which isn't great. So we need to make sure we take that into account. So if you're tempted to do this kind of thing, then I would certainly wouldn't recommend it. There's safety concerns. You know, we've got trailing cables. If you've got kids or pets, they could easily pull this kind of scenario down, and it's only going to be of limited benefit. So we really don't want to sort of get into that. What would be much better is if we try and have a fixed platform or a fixed shelf. Maybe it's a breakfast bar. Maybe it's a shelf in your sort of your living area, as we've got here, and use it for short periods of time. So I'll come on to that in a second. Again, let's raise the monitor height if we can, but let's try and put some thought into having a safe working environment if you are going to stand on a budget. Let's make sure we do that as much as we can. When it comes to lighting, what's really, really important is to make sure that our lighting is fit for purpose when it comes to the actual scenario that we have. So we always use task lights. So if you're using paper versus using monitors, monitors always have a very different lighting requirement than paper. So monitors emit light and documents actually reflect light. So there's two different things there. There's two different requirements. Also, as we change in age, our eyes actually take less light in. They got opacities on the actual lens, and that means there's less light going into the eye. So the older you get, the more light that you need. So to bear that in mind, we need to make sure that we light the information that we're looking at correctly, and we also need to make sure we light for ourselves individually. So a task light can actually help with that. So just coming to the final sort of section of the presentation, just as a reminder, if you can put your sort of Q&As in the chat box, that would be really useful. Hopefully you've got a few good Q&As that we can catch up with here. Let's incorporate movement and rest. So movement is key. It's key for maintaining a long-term health, but it's also key for your posture. It's key for your circulatory. So while sitting is still really unhealthy, what we want to make sure is that we actually, vary that as much as we can with standing. So we actually look at how we can actually boost our activity levels. Maybe you go for a walk before work, you replicate a commute. Maybe you go out at lunchtime and have a walk around the block if you can, get some fresh air to get the blood flowing. Maybe you just take your calls and you walk when you're doing your calls. That can also be something that helps. But movement is really key. Let's think about that as much as we can, and let's make sure that we try to do that. We have sit-stand guidelines. So I always sort of recommend the 28 and 2 rule. So out of every 30 minutes, let's sit in a neutral posture, let's stand in a neutral posture, and let's move and gently stretch for a couple of minutes. So 28 and 2. Over a 7.5 hour workday, 66% of the time you'll be sitting, 26% of the time you'll be standing, and you'll have 7% movement. I think working at home, we're a little bit luckier because normally we have to go down and walk to the kitchen to make a coffee. So we are moving a little bit more, but let's try and make these transitions. This will lead to 2 transitions an hour, and it will make sure that you actually can vary your posture. You can switch between sitting and standing, and you can also have some movement. Let's take some micro breaks. So 2 to 3 micro breaks every hour. A micro break is a 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away from your monitor for 20 seconds. This allows your entire body, your eyes, right down to all of your limbs, to just relax a little bit. And it's really, really key that we allow that to happen. So we don't just stare at the screen all day. There couldn't be anything worse for us if we tried to design it. So key points to remember: short micro breaks, 60 seconds an hour allow us to recover from repetitive stress. Really basic modifications can have a big impact. So if you group together some of these modifications, some of these adjustments, they will have a big exponential benefit. Let's be proactive. So listen to your body. I know it's tempting to just keep on working and working and working, but let's listen to what our body's telling us and make sure that we actually have a good experience. And just a final point, product intervention, as we said, it's not enough. You really need to commit to making some changes and making some behavioral changes. Breaking old habits is key. So that kind of concludes the presentation. My details are on the screen. If you have anything that you want to sort of engage with me with, then great. What I'd really like to engage with now is the Q&A. So I'll pass back to Alison and we can get some of those questions from the chat box. And I look forward to addressing some of your concerns. Thank you.
Hi, Adrian.
Hi.
Thank you very much for that session. I was taking notes as we go because there was a lot there to think about.
Yeah.
A lot to remember, and it contradicts some of the information that we were maybe given a few years back. So it was really interesting. Thank you very much.
No
we've got a couple of questions here. So someone has asked, how far should my monitor be away from me? So you mentioned it should be like an arm width away.
Yeah, so I would absolutely. So really easy measure is like an arm's distance away. So I kind of demonstrate that on my camera. But you need to consider that if you are reclining in your chair, as I suggested, that's going to bring your monitors closer towards you. Now, that might seem really unnatural because your setup might have been your setup for a long period of time. But let's just think about your environment as an ecosystem. If you adjust one thing, then you need to adjust another so that you're still comfortable. But yeah, so you can read it, obviously. If you wear glasses, let's get it comfortable. But a good guide is an arm's distance away.
Okay. We've got a question here. Can we please have an ergo sizer that we can upload on our laptops to remind us as and when to take breaks in between working hours, and a few exercises we can do? There's more to this question, but I'll pause there.
Okay. Yeah. So there are quite a few tools out there, especially for your smartphone. Also for your laptop. What tends to happen, and certainly in my organization, if I try to load anything on my laptop, lots of alarms go off at HQ. So that might not be what your organization allows. Smartphones is the quickest way. And it's, even just using the built-in alarm, if that goes off every 20 minutes, then you set a timer, it goes off, you know that you have to get up and walk around, or you know that you have to do a few little stretches. That's an easy way, but there are quite a few tools on the App Store, the Google Play, whatever you have, that will actually address some of that. So yeah, I would recommend looking at those first.
Mm-hmm. And you've gave lots of tips here, which have been really good. So you gave a lot of pictures and do's and don'ts. But somebody's asked, how can you make it easier for employees to do a DSE workstation assessment at home without involving an expert?
Okay. So what I would recommend is, if you want to go onto the HSE website, so DSE is display screen equipment, and that's what that stands for. And that is a standard that's used in the UK, but it's pretty much replicated in many different regions that we work in. There is actually on the HSE website a DSE checklist, and you can download that. Anybody can download that without membership. If you just search for it in Google, it's there. And that has, okay, you need to take these things into account. And there's about 20 or 30 in there that sort of give you details of, is your environment like this? Are you doing this? So it's a pretty easy checklist. What I would recommend, though, and certainly from our point of view, is we actually do remote DSE assessments for the home, and we do those via Teams or via Zoom, so people can engage directly with an expert. That is a lot more cost effective than you would think. But what I would say is, if you want to connect directly with an expert to give you that advice, it's probably a good idea if you are experiencing any pain. If you just go and try and do the checklist, you might have limited results, but you will be able to look at the guidelines there. So absolutely.
Okay, great. Without wanting to go case specific, there's one here that does talk about kind of rollerball mouse. So I have cubital tunnel syndrome, is that correct? And have pain in my elbow and tingling in the pinky area of my hand. It's worse whilst using a mouse. Any suggestions to improve? I've used a mouse pad with a gel support and it doesn't help. I've also done stretching exercise. So they're asking for your advice on a rollerball mouse. What's your thoughts there?
So I think first thing I would say is make sure you try and get an assessment. That's the first thing I would say. If you are experiencing conditions like that, you need to get some probably expert help. What you could try if you don't want to go to that is a rollerball mouse. There's quite a few on the market. There's actually quite a few. There's one called a mouse trapper, which isn't a rollerball mouse, but it's very, very similar in the way it's set up. So yes, try these things, but just bear in mind that it's probably cheaper to get an assessment and they recommend something than you go and try and get a load of different devices and try them out. Rollerball's really good. I don't know your case specifics in terms of what you're set up with, so I'm probably not best placed to give some advice, but I would try and get some external help if you can.
Okay. There's a really good question here. So my kids are also doing school from home. Any special tips from their school home-based desks? Good question.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a whole nother webinar. It's hard without seeing the actual equipment. What I would suggest is that you encourage your kids to use the backrest. And kids, in terms of movement, you don't really need to encourage them to move because they will do that regardless. If it's most school environments tend to have really hard chairs, so that's something that just I would try and give a cushion, or maybe support them a little bit in that way. And then it depends upon what kind of materials they're using. Maybe they're using tablets, maybe using laptops. I'm not sure. And just like all parenting rules, try and minimize the screen time if you can. A lot easier said than done, but yeah, let's try and give them a little bit of support in terms of cushioning, I would suggest. And just keep an eye on the work surface height. You don't really want your kids leaning too much up because that's going to stress them out a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. I noticed in one of your early slides you had it was a picture of a stool and then it looked like a kind of yoga ball.
Right.
So one of the questions has been surrounding a yoga ball or a Swiss ball or exercise ball, whatever you want to call it. Would you recommend using that for any amount of time, or is that really a no-go?
If you're at yoga, you'd probably have to use it for the whole session. What I would say is if you get tempted to use a yoga ball for more than sort of 5 or 10 minutes, it's not going to allow you to offload the weight at all. So all of your body weight is going to be going directly through your spine because that's how you need to balance, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not recommended for extended periods because when you get tired, you start. I've used yoga ball before. When you get tired, you start leaning forward a bit and you start putting weight on your legs. Mm-hmm. That's not a great position to be in, as we discussed. What we want to do is have the backrest on any chair is to support our back weight. That's what it's there for. So we really want to try and make sure that we use something with a backrest, similar to the couch scenario, 5-10 minutes max, and then let's try and support ourselves properly.
Mm-hmm. So I remember when I worked in Scotland, there was a lot of laws and rules around ergonomics and health and safety, and it was this is going back 10 years, but every office with more than 10 employees had to have somebody who was ergonomically trained, and there's a lot of rules like that to really help you in the UK. Mm-hmm. But here in the Middle East, there isn't the same kind of laws put in place. So the laws really helped companies because it forced them to kind of invest in that and to make it important, or show the importance of it to employees. Without those same laws here, someone's asked, how can we as a company help employees to achieve ergonomics while working from home. So I think that question is really about engagement. So
Yes.
do you have any tips on how you can get the workforce engaged to kind of listen to the tips that you've given?
So I would say that the most important thing to do is to make it relevant to them. If you make it compliance, it's like anything, right? Anybody who's done financial training, anybody who's done compliance training in any other part, if it's like an online system, it just becomes a click through, and you just want to get it off your desk because it's 40 minutes, and I don't really want to. What you need to do is try and position it so that you talk to people about what they're experiencing. Maybe it's an open forum, maybe it's another webinar for your company, and then the follow up is you give some information to them that says, okay, if you have these scenarios, this is what you want to work towards. So whilst I appreciate in the Middle East, the laws around this are limited, what will interest all companies is keeping their staff healthy and engaged in the job that they're doing. As soon as you have back pain or leg pain or hip pain or any kind of musculoskeletal problem, you're not thinking about work anymore. You're thinking about the pain. As soon as that happens, then they're not engaged in what they should be doing. So whilst there's no regulations, it's in a company's interest to keep people healthy and well. So that's what I'd say around that. So
yeah, I know what you're saying about the laws, and when you make it mandatory, it kind of loses the effect. But I found, again, when I went into the workforce young and not really knowing about these things, I didn't actually know how comfortable my seating position could be until someone actually showed me these things.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually taking the time to show, okay, you can actually be a lot more comfortable by the tips that you've mentioned there.
100%. Yeah. And the back, offloading your weight onto the back is one of the key things. You go into offices, you see people in different postures. If you see people perched on the edge of their seat and typing, and you kind of just like, that cannot be comfortable for long extended periods. And if it is, it's going to be degenerative. It's going to be debilitating after a certain period of time.
Yeah. You talked a couple of minutes ago about DSE. Someone's asked if you can just repeat that point of what DSE is.
Yeah, it's display screen equipment. So it was brought in many years ago. It's had very limited changes, but it is for anybody who's working with a monitor, a display screen. When you look at the checklist, what you'll see is that it has questions in there that are kind of quite old. One of them is, what software do you use? Well, you know, the world has kind of gone a little bit past that. Nobody really uses software. Everybody's doing things via browser. You know, you've got probably 150 different things that you interact with on a weekly basis. So that would be an extensive list now. But back in the day, it was for people who were using word processors where the screen was attached, it was fixed, very limited adjustability. So yeah, take a look at that. But DSE is display screen equipment. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody has asked a question about, should I buy blue light filtering glasses?
So this is an interesting one. This was a question that came up to me when I was doing a webinar for one of our clients in San Francisco, and a few people on that particular webinar had mentioned this in the chat. So I don't know about the Middle East, but these are not popular in the UK. These, I think, are a little bit of a fad. I did some background research into some of the properties of blue light filtering glasses, and the papers that I read sort of suggested that they had limited effect. If you're using a good modern monitor, then that should be enough to actually address that concern. If you've got a setting on your smartphone, then most smartphones now have a low light mode that doesn't emit blue light. So I would suggest that it's the jury's out, but don't be wasting money on things that aren't proven. Definitely.
You also talked about the kind of modern monitors that you can get. Someone has asked about what size, if you're going to buy a monitor for working from home, what size of monitor do you suggest?
It's an interesting question. So first thing to note is what is your task? What are you trying to achieve? So one thing that if you're a software programmer and you're doing lines upon lines of code, first thing is how do you want your monitor positioned? Do you want it portrait or landscape? That's a really important one. Second thing, in terms of size, it needs to be so that you can comfortably look at the information that's on the screen. A ridiculous example, but if you were to use like a 70-inch TV, you'd have to be sat quite far back to be able to use that as a monitor. So let's make sure that whatever we're using allows us, by moving our eyes, to see most of the screen. What we don't want is we're having to go up here and up over here. And it's the same with multiple monitors. So if you have 2 monitors or if you have 3 monitors, there's no point in having 3 monitors all lined up like this if you're having to go over here to read something and then you're going over here to look, because that's just going to be really poor for your posture. So I would say that the typical ones are sort of 24-inch. Most of them are widescreen now. So I have 2 widescreen together. And that allows me to have multiple applications open when I'm working. So,
yeah, it's not.
I'm sorry, just one last thing, Alison.
Sure.
Typically, your IT department says this is what you're getting. So if you do have to buy it yourself, maybe ask them what they have invested in. They've probably done some research. They've probably spent some time looking at the different properties of monitors. They can probably get you a deal through those channels. So that's another tip.
Yeah, when buying a chair from working from home, I've sent it to our health. I sent links to the health and safety guy and Mark, like, please pick my chair for me.
Yeah.
Job.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the stuff you've mentioned today is super interesting, but it's habits of a lifetime that you've got to change. So I imagine it will take a little bit of time to try and put these things into practice.
Yes, and one of the interesting things is even when we've done a DSE assessment and we've recommended a chair and we've recommended different devices, we more often than not get feedback. Oh, I'm not comfortable. My last chair was far more comfortable. As you say, if you've sat down in a particular position for 20 to 25 years, and I'm saying you now need to stand up every hour or twice an hour, it's a change. So it's a mental thing. It's as much change in your habits as there can be. But what we really want to try and do, if you get people to make that commitment and say, look, you've changed your body posture. Your body's not used to sitting in that way, but let's try and get through that first period and keep those changes. It will be beneficial in the long run.
One of the things I don't miss from the office is someone else sitting in your chair while you're not there and changing the adjustments. I used to hate when that happens. So at least at home, that's not going to be the case.
Right. Yeah. So a good way around that is to put a sign on the back that says broken, or to get some sort of cover. Nobody wants to sit in a broken chair. Maybe put some yellow tape on it, something like that when you're on holiday. That's a good tip. Yeah,
good. Okay, so we're just about time. So thank you very much for your session today and all the questions. There are some more questions coming in. Don't worry, we will make sure that they are answered. We will be sending a follow-up email to everybody who's attended to ask for your feedback. So please let us know if there's any topic in future that you would like us to cover. Also, Adrian gave a lot of really good tips today. So if you want to go back and reread or re-listen to it or share with a colleague, the recording will be sent to you on that same feedback email. So thank you, Adrian, for joining us today. And thank you to all the attendees. I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.